Moving on to another form of nihilism, we come upon Mereological Nihilism. What is Mereological Nihilism? Mereological nihilism is the philosophical position that objects with proper parts do not exist, and only basic building blocks without parts exist, or that nothing is a proper part of anything. The parts of the object can be both spatial and temporal. Mereological nihilism also asserts that objects existing in time do not have any temporal parts. So what to make of these statements? Well, as we all know, appearances, when taken at their face value, appear very complex and also give the impression of being composed of many, many parts. The complexity itself functioning as the demonstrative evidence as to the existence of fragmented objects. But what we should never fail to consider is that an impression of complexity is not actual complexity, but only an appearance of complexity. An appearance of something means that an existential aspect is indicating something that is not necessarily a truth of its existence. Its existence being a key point to remember in these considerations. For wherein is the existence of any proposed object? For an object to be existing, what is the fundamental requirement? It can't be shape or location, for there are many existential aspects that don't have fixed shapes, such as water or air. And there are many existential aspects that don't have any locations, such as time and space. And if you have any misgivings about those assertions, then please explain what the fixed shape of water and air is. And please explain where exactly time and space are located. And all of this hasn't even broached areas where space and location cannot even be pinpointed, such as the case with atoms and other various subatomic particles that cannot be seen and hence not experienced directly with the perceptual senses, and as such are only verified indirectly via emergent properties, such as the microscope or any other such utility. And while you are thinking about all that, wherein is the actuality of anything that isn't permanent, never stops changing, is in a perpetual state of locational flux, has no discernible certain context, and that will, given enough time, eventually lose its identifiable state, which is the decisive definable feature to any object's capacity to be classified. In other words, the impression that an object is indeed an objectified property, that is to say, an externalized extant aspect, is illusory. So to focus on the very complex tapestry of mosaic detail that pervades these illusory projections is emphasizing the attention on the wrong avenue of investigatory inquiry. If indeed an object is not a mind-independent embodiment, then it cannot be rightfully said that it has any parts. The very question of an object's existence is dependent on existentiality. For what else gives an object the context to be confirmed or disputed in the first place? So even if somehow it could be shown that an object has a solid profile independent of the agency that gives such notions a parameter, which it can't, it still wouldn't be an item of consideration without such agency to provide the platform to verify it. In other words, any items of existentiality have no rightful existence outside of existentiality, and even if they did, the possibility of such is meaningless, for any phenomenal features can only be addressed from a context, and the context we are operating from is the agency of awareness, which is, as far as we are concerned, the only standpoint from which knowledge can be gathered, and of which is the only existential center that we can know to be for sure. With awareness being the only conduit of which the interaction with sensory data is staged, then awareness is dealing with a unified stream, which we call reality. The stream of reality has no parts, but gives off the impression of such. All such impressions of complexity, detail, and fragmentation are literally a mirage. Yes, a mirage. That is to say, an illusion that the mind-projected reality has an independent existence from the existential agency that produces it. That it is, in fact, substantial and of its own individual origin. This kind of mindset serves as the binding shackles that limit your possibilities. So much of everything that is seemingly out of reach, lost, and disconnected from your potentiality is due to the false conditioning of mind-independent reality. The same is true when you dream. The default state of dream awareness is also preset into this assumptive navigational position. But just as we can realize to different extents that the reality in dreams is a complete creation of the mind, we can too also realize it in the waking state, which is really just a different degree of the same thing. It is more solidified and reflects the anchored position with a continuity which enables confirmation bias. But it is still a dream state nonetheless. It just has more mass, and hence more density, which is indicative of attachment to a specific set of conditional circumstances. And so the nature of reality itself, which is a projected stream of potentiality that reflects back to awareness various energetic vibrations that get translated via sense organs into sensory data for the consciousness, is whole and unified. Whether or not you recognize this, or, if not, and would rather stick to an externalized objective framework, you cannot deny that, besides the nothingness itself, all manifested aspects at their core are energy. Wherein a field of energy do parts have a substantial actuality? Just as if we were to look at the programming code for a computer-simulated world, what would we see? Would we see anything more or less equal in the code? Would any of the items of the simulated world have any other origin than the code itself? Would any of the items in the simulated computer world be independent objects or contain any parts? If we were to somehow walk through the computer-simulated world, is there any real substantial separation or break in the unified field of data, beyond only an appearance of such? Would the simulated trees on the simulated landscape be any different than the simulated animals or simulated weather patterns? The code may have different patterns or valuations, but all the code is still just code, is it not? In this simulated world, would a powerful fire-breathing dragon be fundamentally any different than a tiny tadpole? And if so, wherein is the difference? And to whom does this difference occur? Perhaps to your playable character. Maybe your playable character is something special, or has some fundamental difference than anything else in the simulated world? None whatsoever. But for the agency that directs the playable character, now we may be getting somewhere. And does this agency belong to the simulated world? No. But could perhaps this agency be responsible for programming the simulated world? Now, can we see where we go wrong in the waking state by establishing an identification with the playable character in a world narrative? A worldview or an ego could only be said to be true if they had any substantiality. And they don't. They are illusory. Not just because of a story being told, but empirically demonstratively so, unto oneself, upon deeper examination of the phenomenal content. So, hence, all sensory data is whole and unified, as it is a reflection of a whole unified field of energy, which constitutes everything and anything in the experience of the reality of a world. There are no parts proper, but only an appearance of such when taken at face value. For even if we delve into the illusion itself, and examine the fundamental building blocks of the mind-projected reality in a so-called objectified manner, we find the same kind of truth at the root of these manifestations. The foundational materials that compose matter are without any parts. You cannot call any of the inner designs of an atomic structure a part of anything else. The atom itself is not composed of parts, but only of building blocks without any parts. And these elementary particles never unify into being non-individual. But individuality is not indicative of a part either, for the medium of all individual structures, nothingness, the supreme, empty, primary, underlying potentiality that is the wellspring of all that is, cannot be distinguished as either a part or a whole. Subatomic building blocks are arrangements of wholes coming together to express individuality, none of which can rightfully be called a whole, because in order for there to be a whole, there would have to be parts. But since there are no parts, and only a unity of wholes, there are no wholes either, but only an infinite oneness, expressing itself through various arrangements of itself.